Welcome to Modern Mind, Ancient Book, where we are going back to move forward. We're finding a love for the law, the prophets, and the writings. If you'd like to contact us, you are more than welcome to send us an email at modernmindancientbook@gmail.com. I'm Roger, I'm your host. We've got Pete here today and Nicky J. How you boys doing?
Doing good.
Yeah.
Good. Welcome. Today, we are doing another prophet. The prophet Daniel. Famous, this book.
Yeah.
Everybody knows this book. My shack, your shack, and a bed to go.
Yeah.
Right?
That's it.
I actually haven't heard that one. I haven't heard that one. I know the Rack Shack and Benny from VeggieTales. We were just talking about that the other day. Like, everybody remembers VeggieTales, and I would just leave the room whenever that was on. But I do remember that song. Those ones, that's new for me.
That's from my Bible college professor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That would explain why I've never heard it.
Said that for some reason. Yeah.
Because it's funny?
It was pretty funny.
Yeah.
So, everybody knows the three who were thrown into the fire and the fourth that appeared and all that kind of thing, right?
And the lion's den.
And the Daniel Lion's Den.
Yeah, and there's another.
We know a lot of these cute little stories, Sunday school stories.
It turns out there's a lot more in this book than that, though.
Oh, yeah.
That's true. And even those stories are not really that cute when you consider the fact that those are people and stuff happened.
No. So these are adult books.
Right.
Despite having a lot of stories that we're all relatively aware of. I would say this, though. I would say we're not really aware of them at all if that's all we ever know is the children's stories.
Right.
Right.
So we shouldn't rest on that.
Mm-hmm.
So the Book of Daniel. The title is named after the author. The Hebrew title is Daniel, which means God is my judge. The Septuagint, or the Greek Old Testament, and the English title follow the Hebrew, Daniel. It's a fitting name because the content of this is an account and explanation of the judgment of God.
Right.
The book opens with the deportation of Daniel and his friends because of the Babylonian judgment. The book also includes the judgment of other individuals and nations because of sinfulness. It's important to remember that judgment also includes deliverance at the same time. The book of Daniel records both the punishment and deliverance of the individuals as well as Israel through the judgment of God. When Babylon swept through, they were being used according to the Bible.
Right.
And Israel was not, or the Judeans at this point, because Israel had already been taken, the northern 10 tribes, by the Assyrians. I gotta remember to speak accurately. But the Judeans, or Judah, the southern 10 tribes, were not the only people who had done some things that God wasn't happy with. And Nebuchadnezzar was being used to finish that, right? So, Daniel claims to be the author, and the text clearly states that Daniel recorded his dreams and visions in written form. The book opens with historical events in which Daniel participated, like the captivity and all that kind of thing. He uses the first person singular in writing. He was born into a noble family, and he was one of the children that were taken into captivity, into the deportation.
Right.
Daniel was, again, part of the nobility of Israel.
Right.
Daniel and his friends were described as youth in whom there was no defect.
Right.
They were good looking, they had intelligence, they were wise, they had understanding, they were discerning, they had knowledge, and they had ability for serving. He was a very dedicated man, much more than most of us these days are. And he was a very spiritual young man.
Right.
He, in fact, wouldn't eat the king's food and drink. He was like a vegetarian at a table full of meat.
And like most vegetarians, you couldn't resist telling people about
Yeah.
Ezekiel bread, anyone? So, God was blessing Daniel and his friends as he gave them knowledge and intelligence and wisdom. Daniel understood all kinds of visions and dreams. He had every matter of wisdom and understanding, and the king relied on him and consulted with him. He was found 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers. Ezekiel, a contemporary with Daniel, states 3 times in his book that Daniel was a righteous man.
Right.
So that's pretty cool. I mean, we learned about Ezekiel and his accuracy and all the things that he predicted, and then he's talking about Daniel. He's like, yeah, this is the guy.
Yeah, this is the guy.
Yeah.
So, there's...
This guy's my hero. I'm trying to live up to him.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, Daniel was an outstanding person.
Right.
There's some reason to believe that it was Daniel's unique capabilities that formed what later became the Magi who came to see Jesus. It was Daniel that started that movement. He was profoundly influential.
Right.
So the historical account of the book of Daniel spans a period of 70 years. The prophetic account of Daniel spans thousands of years.
Right.
Again, eschatological.
Right.
Right? And what's that again?
Study of the end times.
Yep.
Future times.
Daniel has more than the kid stories because Daniel has the 70 weeks narrative, of which we all bang our heads against walls and try to figure it out. There are different views in Christianity that call, there's a millennial kingdom, there's not a millennial kingdom. The people, the church will, perfect the world, and Jesus will then come back, right? The amillennialist kind of thing. You got the millennials, and then you've got this sort of preterist thing where everything kind of happened in the past. Right? But it's odd because it keeps repeating. So if it was fulfilled then, why does it just keep happening over and over again? It's all of this stuff is the bane of my existence.
I don't disagree, but there's a little part of me that's saying, like, why not both? Because I do find that other stuff interesting. It's just me.
Yeah.
Look, I want to know the intricacies of the end, But I don't want to sit around and talk about it with somebody for, endlessly. You're going to be raptured, so you don't have to worry about it. Have you read Exodus? Because the people were there when God was judging the people. So, I don't understand why you would say we're going to be raptured. I'm glad you're convinced of it. I hope that's true. But why are we even talking about this when you have never celebrated Passover? Can we talk about Passover?
Oh, yes, but I think people just have different interests, and so there's that element of it. I think the one thing, like you alluded to, that I would want to avoid is thinking that I can confidently know any of those answers. Yeah. If I ever say that I know, it means I don't.
Right.
I think the holidays are great. I want to, those are
the holidays are cool, man. I'm not arguing with you at all. I'm just saying, I like other stuff too. Yeah.
And to say you got to figure it out is the ultimate hypocrisy, really.
Yeah, because we're just, we're like, so let's say the most blessed person lives to be 104, right? That's not long.
No.
This book is, 605 to 536, so we're 2025. That's 2,630 years ago.
Yep.
Even Daniel didn't know what he was talking about.
Right.
Sealed up until the end. And here we are in a time when we imagine it's like helicopters and vaccines. We just
as if we can know that, and how many more times it might repeat.
Well, did Daniel imagine helicopters and vaccines?
I don't know.
No.
Yeah. Maybe as much as Nostradamus.
But it's too big of a challenge.
Right.
It's just not that interesting.
To you.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff you get into, well, I wouldn't say I don't find it interesting, because I do, but I look at it and say, like, that's too big of a challenge. I'm going to wait for Roger to tell me.
I don't have the time to go into that.
Right, not that time.
I love devouring books, but I like the history books better than the theology books. But I've had some knockdown dragouts in school, and just wasn't that good.
I would not want to have a knockdown dragout with Roger in any sense.
Verbally. Daniel has this really, really long time period in his mind and in his writing. And he did witness a lot of significant events, during the writing of this book. Daniel was probably a teenager at the time of his deportation, which means he was born around 620 BC. In 626 BC, Nebuchadnezzar united the Babylonians and other tribal groups in a war against the Assyrians. The Babylonians destroyed Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, in 612 BC, and that's when they began to unite from sea to sea,
Manifest destiny.
Manifest destiny.
Yes.
So this led to an expansionist attitude. King Josiah died in battle at Megiddo in 609 BC. Now, also understand this, Josiah was the one who found the law and brought it back.
Right.
And asked Israel to repent. Mm-hmm. And asked the Judeans to repent and asked them to believe and reinstitute the law. He was the great hope. The Babylonians defeated the Egyptians in the Battle of Carchemish, which resulted in their dominance of the Middle East in 605. Nebuchadnezzar, the son of Nebuchadnezzar, and a general of the army swept through the Levant, Israel, and drove the Egyptians back into their own land. Nebuchadnezzar died, which forced Nebuchadnezzar to return to Babylon to consolidate his reign. He invaded Jerusalem on the way back and took children from royal and noble families. That's when Ezekiel was taken.
Right.
He wanted to train these children for future leadership, as well as guarantee the obedience of their parents while he returned to Babylon. Daniel began to interpret dreams for Nebuchadnezzar about 2 years after his education in Babylon, 603 BC. King Jehoiakim and Judah rebelled against Babylon, resulting in a second invasion and deportation by Nebuchadnezzar in 597 BC. Judah rebelled again a few years later, resulting in the third siege and deportation under Nebuchadnezzar. The city was besieged in January 588, and Jerusalem fell 2 years later. They were starving. They were emaciated,
right.
They were broken, and many people were doing many horrible things in the city.
Right.
The stories from that time are devastating. Daniel later witnessed the fall of Babylon to Cyrus the Persian. Belshazzar, the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar and co-ruler of Babylon, held a great banquet to encourage his troops. During the time of the Medo-Persian siege, he blasphemed the Lord God, which resulted in his judgment as communicated through the handwriting on the wall. This is, we have a saying.
Yeah, right.
The writing's on the wall.
Fun fact.
Yeah,
fun fact.
And it comes from Daniel. Much of what we know and believe comes from the Bible because it's wisdom literature. Because it's instruction.
Right.
Because men for many, many thousands of years, 3,000 years, have sought these contents to enrich their lives, to change them, to cause them to be more than they were before they were confronted with them.
Right.
And because it's interesting.
And because it's interesting. That's right. Human experiences are cool. But nowadays, I've been noticing the entertainment's kind of changed a little bit, where instead of the good overcoming the evil is kind of good and bad, and it overcomes. Right. There's kind of this weird theme and stuff like that.
Yeah, I've noticed that shit too.
Have you seen that?
Yeah, and it's interesting because that can be done with very different motives. It can sometimes be used to obscure and blur the lines between good and evil, and that would not be a good thing.
Right.
But if the purpose of it is to express the human condition and what's going on a little bit more accurately, you kind of get a better view of life from that.
Right.
So it really depends on the intent, and I kind of seen it done both ways.
I agree with that. And that's another point that I'm glad you mentioned, because these books all talk about the intention of the person, of the people, of the group. Do you desire to keep the covenant and live in righteousness? Is that your intent? Or do you intend to kind of fake it, right? Or do you intend to just be straight evil?
Right.
The last two, both of them, result in judgment because God will not be mocked.
Right.
But then you get this first one, which is the most challenging part. Do you intend to live a righteous life according to God's will?
Right.
Which is totally contrary to what we are.
Right.
Jesus said, "This new commandment I leave you, that you love as I have loved you." That is a crazy statement.
Right.
Because he was willing to go to death. He was willing to say, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," while they were murdering him. And so, this eschatological stuff contained in this book is very much that. It's a wholly other worldview contained at a time that there was really no reason for it to exist. Right. Daniel was in captivity, in exile, yet he's speaking of the restoration of the future of a nation that never should have been restored. Right. They should have just been sucked into oblivion and become Mesopotamian-rooted, Babylonian, Persian, Median, whoever was left.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what Daniel's speaking into, right? And it does come down to the intention, because Daniel's intention was to be a vibrant worshiper in truth to the living God, despite his circumstances. Right. In there, God blessed him with visions of a future where his people were safe,
right?
Where the temple was good.
That's one thing we've gotten away from, that view of a people. We've become more of an individualist society.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that I guess breaks my heart the most, and really one of the reasons why we're doing this in this format.
And to Pete's point, a lot of that is going to come from the community and being involved in these conversations with people. Right. That's difficult for me, and presumably for a lot of others, because, as we have alluded to many times now, that's not how our society is set up.
Yeah.
We're coming at it from a different perspective. Right. I would much more naturally fall into the individualistic thing.
Yeah.
That's American.
It's American.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that even to this day there are more collectivist societies. I'm aware of it.
Yeah.
But that's very foreign to me. Right. It's something that I only desire because of this.
Because of the Bible.
Because of the Bible. It's not in my personality.
That's right. Yeah. No, I agree with that. I mean, think of just in terms of relationships that have been built over the last 6 months or so. We're already seeing a community forming around these ideas.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So some of the big problem now is we've got to the point where it's, if I say it's true, it's true.
Yeah.
Whether it's based on fact or nothing else.
Well, there's got to be some humility.
There's got to be some humility in that.
Talked about before, and that's another benefit of the community aspect, because you have people who will
rein you in a little bit.
Yeah, and we all need that from time to time.
And then once you've done that, you can say, at best, seems like that's the answer.
Right.
And so then we can have conversations.
Right.
We got to have the fiddler on the roof mentality. When the people are arguing and one of them says you're right, and then the other guy makes his case, he says you're right too, and then the third guy says they can't both be right, and he says you're right too.
That's kind of it, right? Yeah. We've just got to be willing to love one another before we're sure of our answers.
Yeah.
Right? Even if we have minor disagreements, we're still expressing that spark, which is of God, right? We're still wrestling with who He is. Right. And through that struggle, instead of becoming people who argue and fight and depart from one another, we should become the sort of people who struggle with God and come closer to one another, because we're actually more alike in being wrong than we are more alike in being right about most things. It is that humility that is deeply needed.
And this book is very humbling, because I'm looking at this and saying, if a vegetarian can be that righteous, who am I to judge? I'm sorry,
I might not eat what he eats, but I'll hang out with him. Right. That's a good one.
We can go to lunch and he can order what he wants and I'll order what I want. As long as we don't hate each other because of it.
Yeah. So the book of Daniel is a challenging book, but the important part is to note that Daniel was a real person, that he had real impacts in the world, and that these nations were real, and they had real leaders, and their names are written on walls and buildings, and there's depictions of them. One of the things that I think trips a lot of people out is to realize that Daniel was looking up at the stars.
Right.
and he was practicing a sort of theistic astrology.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some people don't want to hear that because that's
astrology. Yeah.
Daniel was an astrologist.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how the Magi found Jesus.
Right.
It's whose name was he serving?
Exactly. It's not so bad to look at the stars if what you're really looking for is the one who made the stars.
That's right. Yeah, if you're looking up at the celestial bodies thinking, Lord, thank you for making them. Show us what it is that you desire to show us in the stars, right? Then it's not idolatry, it's not broken. Yeah. It's not even a struggle if it's good. It's just something that you're learning. You're trying to get that into you. You're trying to understand it. And the stars were very much a part of the ancient world. Right. The sun, the moon, and the stars were given in Genesis to teach us, to lead us, and to bring us to the days, the times, and the seasons.
And if we could just shut off what we expect and what we've been taught for like 5 seconds, it actually makes sense that God would speak to us through creation.
Yeah. The skies proclaim the glory of God, the heavens proclaim, right? Yeah. It's Psalm 19.
It's kind of right in there.
Right.
Yeah. And Daniel did that. So the first recipients of the book of Daniel were his contemporaries. Daniel, Ezekiel, Jeremiah. They were familiar with each other's works. Again, there was a time when there was crazy prophetic action. Yeah. I mean, these are standout people. Very interesting individuals, and they were at the same time. And all of it is future looking. Every single one of them. This is where we get the majority of our prophecy.
It's kind of a super group.
Yeah.
There's only 3 of them, so no one had to play bass.
Yeah.
I like bass.
I do too.
That's what I played.
That's my favorite one to play, but I'm just saying it's not the most glorious.
Right.
If we were there, we would have brought up the band. It's cool.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, so has God forsaken his people? That's the question in this book. Has God forsaken his people? Because your people, Israel, they've been sinful, but are they forsaken for good? Are they done? No. Cyrus the Persian will defeat, or has defeated, the Babylonians, and he's going to put in new policies, and the captives are going to return home and rebuild the temple, the cities, and get their lives back. And you, if you're living during this time, you get the opportunity to return and have freedom again to worship and live your life as an Israeli. You need to read so that you understand that God has a sovereign plan and that there is also a future. You realize that the Lord has provided better leadership for you in captivity than you had under your own kings.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of a humbling too. There's a little bit of a slap in the face.
Not reminiscent of Joseph with Egypt.
Yeah, that's right. It's that spark that's in us that says to us, these things are wrong and they shouldn't be this way.
Right.
Dear Lord, why? Right? Mm-hmm. And then he says, well, return to me and we'll talk about it. That's the best part about it. No matter how flawed we are, he's patient.
Well, how many times have we seen that with just the prophets that we've been covering recently? It was, here's the judgment, here's the judgment, here's the judgment. But if you come back, then we talk about restoration.
Yeah, there's a principle that I'm not sure is shared in Christian circles and Jewish culture, that a prophecy may come to pass, or it may not.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another one of those things, though, that offends certain people, modern people's sensibilities, but really, if we think about it, that's obviously true to me.
The prophet Jonah very much records that. I didn't want to go because I knew you'd forgive him.
Yeah.
You told me to go tell them no, they're going to get judged, but then I knew that you'd forgive them, so I didn't want to go.
And then they repented, and they were saved, until they weren't, and they got destroyed.
And then the Assyrians were eventually destroyed because Nineveh was sacked by Babylon.
Yeah, so it's kind of, it's conditional, it's unfolding, it's developing.
By whose name are you known and who do you serve? That's the question.
Right.
All through these books. If you're reading this, when you're reading this, you want to understand God's prophetic plan for the future of Israel and the nations. Everybody's contained in this one. And this will give you a hope as you await the establishment of the eternal kingdom through the coming, and here's that term,
Right.
the Son of Man.
Yep.
This is where it's introduced. Son of Man. It's a good one. What's the argument, Nick?
The Most High God rules over the realms of mankind and will establish the Son of Man over his eternal kingdom. There's a lot right in there.
Yes.
Yeah. What's the key verse, Pete?
Daniel 2:44. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever.
I like that one.
No.
I like that one.
Yeah.
That moves me. The purpose of this book is to encourage exiled Jewish people to repent and hope in the coming of God's eternal messianic kingdom by reviewing God's prophetic plan for the nations.
Yes.
Daniel is a nation builder, like Nehemiah and Zerubbabel, but this is prophetic nation building.
Right.
Very cool book.
Definitely.
Thanks for joining me, boys.
Thank you.